I'll never forget the morning I got the strangest dispatch call of my career, a 911 complaint about a vehicle parked in my own driveway. As a police officer, I'd handled countless neighbor disputes, but nothing quite prepared me for this moment. The call came in during what was supposed to be my post-night shift downtime, alerting me to a serious parking violation at an address I recognized immediately as my own home. The caller? None other than my notorious HOA representative, Karen Thompson, who'd made it her personal mission to enforce every single community regulation with military precision. Karen had been a thorn in many neighbors' sides, known for her strict adherence to homeowner association rules and her tendency to escalate minor issues into major conflicts. Just 15 minutes earlier, I'd been standing on my own porch, still wearing my police uniform, as she threatened to call the police about my patrol car being parked in my driveway instead of the garage. I'd politely explained I'd just finished a grueling night shift and planned to move it after getting some rest, but she was having none of it. When she stormed off, muttering threats about reporting me, I never imagined I'd actually received the complaint through official channels. As I reached for my radio to respond to the call, I couldn't help but wonder how this situation would unfold when Karen discovered exactly who she'd summoned. The morning I'd been dreading as a police officer finally arrived, though not in the way I'd expected. At 6:15 a.m., after a grueling 12-hour night shift that had included responding to 3 domestic disturbances, 2 traffic accidents, and a convenience store robbery, I pulled my patrol car into my driveway, exhaled deeply, and prepared to finally get some much-needed rest. Our usually quiet suburban neighborhood was still sleeping, and I tried to be as quiet as possible as I locked my vehicle. My wife Sarah had already left for her own job, taking our family SUV from the garage, which meant I had to leave my patrol car outside temporarily. The homeowner association had clear rules about vehicles being parked in driveways overnight, but I figured a few hours until I could wake up and move it wouldn't be an issue. Boy, was I wrong. I'd barely kicked off my boots and hung up my duty belt when the doorbell rang insistently. Through the peephole, I could see Karen Thompson standing there, clipboard in hand, wearing her usual outfit of pressed khakis and a HOA polo shirt like some kind of community enforcement uniform. Karen, a woman in her early 50s with perfectly coiffed short hair and designer sunglasses perpetually perched on her head, had moved into our neighborhood 6 months ago and immediately appointed herself as the unofficial enforcer of all HOA regulations. She stood about 5'5" but carried herself like she was 6 feet tall, with that particular brand of confidence that comes from believing you're always right. Opening the door still in my police uniform, I managed a tired smile and asked what I could do for her. "Officer," she began, her voice carrying that same condescending tone she used with everyone, "I'm sure as a law enforcement professional, you understand the importance of following rules and maintaining community standards." She gestured dramatically toward my patrol car. "Your vehicle is in direct violation of Section 3.4 of our community guidelines, which clearly states that all vehicles must be parked inside garages or designated parking spots by 10 p.m. I tried to explain that I'd just returned from a night shift, that my wife was using the garage, and that I'd move the car as soon as I got a few hours of sleep. But Karen wasn't having it. She flipped through her clipboard, producing a laminated copy of the HOA regulations, pointing to the specific clause with a perfectly manicured fingernail. "The rules don't make exceptions for your work schedule," she insisted. "I've already received complaints from the Hendersons next door and the Johnsons across the street. They say the flashing lights on your police car disturb their sleep." I glanced at my vehicle, noting that all emergency lights were off, and wondered how many neighbors she'd actually spoken to at 6 a.m. The conversation continued in circles, with me trying to be reasonable and Karen becoming increasingly agitated. Finally, she played her trump card: "If you don't move that vehicle immediately, I'll have no choice but to call the police and report this violation." The irony wasn't lost on me, and I couldn't help but chuckle softly. "Ma'am, I am the police," I reminded her gently, but she waved her hand dismissively. "Then you should know better." Realizing this conversation was going nowhere and that my exhaustion was making me less patient than usual, I decided to take a different approach. I invited Karen inside for a cup of coffee, hoping that a more civilized setting might help us reach a compromise. She accepted, though reluctantly, and I spent the next 10 minutes explaining the challenges of shift work in law enforcement, the late-night emergencies we respond to, and how sometimes the rigid enforcement of rules needed to be balanced with common sense and community understanding. But Karen seemed immune to reason, insisting that rules were rules and that even police officers weren't above the law or HOA regulations. She finished her coffee, thanked me with artificial politeness, and delivered her ultimatum: "Officer, you have until 8 a.m. to move that vehicle, or I will be calling the authorities." As she left, she added, "I'm sorry, but I have a duty to all residents of this community." After she left, I contemplated my options. I could wake up in an hour, move the car, and go back to sleep, losing precious rest. I could call my wife and ask her to switch vehicles during her lunch break, but that seemed unnecessary. Or I could simply wait and see if Karen would actually follow through with her threat. Given her track record, I suspected she would. What I didn't anticipate was exactly how the situation would unfold. At 7 a.m., I tried to catch a few minutes of sleep, but by 7:30, my police radio crackled to life. Even off duty, I kept it on in case of emergencies in our district. The dispatcher announced a domestic disturbance call for the 1200 block of Millfield Drive, my exact address. My heart sank as I recognized not only the address but also the nature of the call. Caller reports a dispute with a neighbor regarding a parking violation. Caller states the neighbor is being uncooperative and refusing to comply with community regulations. The female caller, the dispatcher noted, insisted that the police needed to come immediately to enforce the homeowner association rules. I sat up in bed, fully awake now, as the absurdity of the situation hit me. Karen had actually done it. She'd called 911 to report me, a police officer, for parking my patrol car in my own driveway. The professional in me knew I had several options. I could let another officer handle the call, I could call the station and explain the situation, or I could respond myself. But the human part of me, the part that had dealt with Karen's attitude for months, wanted to see her reaction when she realized exactly who she'd summoned. As I sat in my bedroom listening to the radio chatter, I made a decision that would probably become station folklore for years to come. I keyed my radio and informed dispatch that I would handle the call personally, since I happened to be in the immediate vicinity and familiar with the parties involved. My partner, Mike, responded with confusion, asking if I needed backup, but I assured him I could manage this domestic dispute on my own. Part of me felt guilty for taking some pleasure in what was about to unfold, but after months of Karen's arbitrary enforcement of regulations and her morning ultimatum, I couldn't resist the opportunity to let justice serve itself. I quickly changed back into my full uniform, complete with duty belt, badge, and body camera, which I made sure to activate before leaving my house. Walking across my own lawn to approach my front door from the street, I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. I could see Karen peeking through her living room window, clearly waiting for the police to arrive so she could witness my comeuppance. When she saw me approaching in uniform, I watched as her confident smirk slowly transformed into confusion, then horrified realization. Karen opened her door before I could knock, and the color drained from her face as she took in the full picture, me, in uniform, standing on her porch, notepad in hand. "Ma'am," I began in my most official tone, "Officer Martinez responding to your 911 call regarding a parking violation. I understand you have a complaint about a vehicle parked at 1234 Millfield Drive?" Karen's mouth opened and closed several times, like a fish out of water, before she managed to stutter. I didn't know. I mean, how was I supposed to?" I continued with perfect professionalism, following the exact protocol I'd use for any other complaint. "Can you describe the nature of your complaint, ma'am?" "The dispatcher indicated you reported that the vehicle owner was uncooperative when you requested they move their car." Karen's hands began to shake slightly as she tried to regain her composure. "Well, yes, but I had no idea that the officer was you." Her voice cracked on the last word. "So you're saying you called 911 to report that I was refusing to move my patrol car from my own driveway?" I asked, maintaining my neutral police officer expression. "Ma'am, I need to inform you that misuse of emergency services is a serious matter. Making false reports or calling 911 for non-emergency situations can result in fines or even charges." At this point, Karen was visibly trembling. She launched into a rambling explanation about HOA regulations, community standards, and how she was just trying to maintain property values. "I'm so sorry, Officer Martinez. I mean, neighbor. I mean." She took a deep breath and tried again. I had no way of knowing that you were the same police officer who would respond to my call. I was just following the homeowner association guidelines, and when you refused to move your car, I thought calling the police was the appropriate next step. I pulled out my notepad, making a show of documenting her statement. So to clarify, Mrs. Thompson, at no point during our conversation this morning did you recognize that I was wearing a police uniform? And when I identified myself as Officer Martinez, you still felt it necessary to call 911? My neighbors were beginning to emerge from their houses, drawn by the sight of a police officer taking a statement on their normally quiet street. The Johnsons, whom Karen had supposedly quoted as complaining about my car, were standing on their lawn looking puzzled, clearly unaware they had been cited as complainants. Karen's explanation became increasingly desperate. The regulations are very clear about overnight parking. Section 3.4 specifically states that all vehicles must be in garages by 10 p.m., and your car was clearly visible this morning. I've been trying to enforce these rules consistently for all residents, and I couldn't make an exception just because. She trailed off, realizing she was digging herself deeper. Just because I'm a police officer living in the community I serve? I finished for her. Mrs. Thompson, let me explain something about community policing. When officers live in the neighborhoods we protect, it creates better relationships between law enforcement and residents. When I respond to emergencies in this area, I'm not just protecting strangers, I'm protecting my neighbors, my friends, and my own family. But that relationship requires mutual respect and understanding. By now, several neighbors had gathered, including the Hendersons, whom Karen had mentioned during our earlier conversation. Mrs. Henderson approached us, looking confused. Is everything all right, Officer Martinez? We didn't complain about your car. We're grateful to have a police officer living in our neighborhood, it makes us feel safer. Karen's last bit of credibility crumbled as I turned back to her. Mrs. Thompson, based on my investigation, it appears that your complaints about multiple neighbors being disturbed by my patrol car were inaccurate. Furthermore, calling 911 for a civil HOA matter is inappropriate and ties up emergency resources that could be needed for real emergencies. I'm going to document this incident, but I'm not going to cite you for misuse of emergency services this time. However, I strongly encourage you to have a more neighborly approach to resolving future issues. I handed her my card, the same card I gave to all community members, and added, if you have future concerns, please feel free to contact me directly at this number during reasonable hours, or speak with me when we encounter each other in the neighborhood. I'm always happy to work with residents to find solutions that benefit everyone. Karen took the card with trembling hands, mumbling apologies and promises to handle things differently in the future. As I walked back across the street to my house, I could hear neighbors talking among themselves, some laughing softly at the absurdity of the situation, others expressing sympathy for the embarrassed HOA representative. Mike's voice crackled over my radio, Martinez, please tell me you got that whole thing on body cam. The guys at the station are never going to believe this story. I confirmed that everything was recorded and added, consider it a training video on community relations and the proper use of emergency services. That afternoon, after finally getting some sleep, I moved my patrol car into the garage, just as the HOA regulations required. But the story of the morning Karen called the cops on a cop became legendary at the station, and surprisingly, it marked the beginning of a complete transformation in my neighborhood's dynamics. Karen, thoroughly humbled by the experience, became much more reasonable in her HOA enforcement. She started hosting neighborhood coffee gatherings, where residents could discuss community issues in a friendly environment before they escalated to formal complaints. Our neighbors rallied around the idea of supporting each other rather than strictly enforcing every minor infraction. A month later, Karen even approached me privately to apologize again and to thank me for handling the situation with such professionalism. She admitted that the incident had given her a wake-up call about how her rigid interpretation of rules had been damaging community relationships. From that day forward, whenever new residents moved into our neighborhood, someone always made sure to tell them the story of the HOA representative who learned that sometimes the person enforcing the law is the same person living next door, trying to make the community a better place for everyone.